Japan once again whitewashes the coercive nature of its wartime wrongdoings and escalates its claim to South Korea's Dokdo Islet in its new school textbooks. Seoul, in response, calls out Tokyo for its attitude toward correcting history. The second Summit for Democracy kicked off on Tuesday, an annual meeting designed to hold the rising authoritarian powers in check, including China. Co-hosting the summit, President Yoon is also set to lead the first leader-level plenary session on Wednesday. More eased rules related to coronavirus are underway here in South Korea, with the quarantine mandate expected to be reduced from a week to 5 days. Japan once again whitewashes the coercive nature of its wartime wrongdoings and escalates its claim to South Korea's Dokdo Islet in its new school textbooks. Seoul, in response, summoned an official from the Japanese embassy in Korea and protested Tokyo's false claims. Our foreign affairs correspondent Choi Min-jung starts us off.
Japan has yet again approved the publication of textbooks that contain misleading historical claims. A textbook screening committee under Japan's Education Ministry on Tuesday approved 149 textbooks to be used in elementary schools from 2024. In some of the textbooks for 3rd to 6th grade elementary school students, Tokyo decided to dilute the extent of the coercion used in the conscription of Korean men during Japan's colonial rule. In a book for 6th graders, the current sentence, "Korean men were conscripted as soldiers of the Japanese army," will be changed to "Korean men participated in the Japanese army as soldiers, and conscription came after." Korean men were also described as young people who voluntarily joined the Japanese army. In another book, the term conscripted was removed altogether. The current elementary school textbooks do not contain content on the so-called comfort women, so not much is expected to have changed regarding forced labor. But in one of the textbooks from next year, the term "brought in" will be changed to "mobilized" when describing that a large number of Koreans and Chinese were forcibly brought into Japan. Japan has also further solidified its claim over South Korea's Dokdo Islets in the East Sea. More textbooks will describe Dokdo as being an inherent territory of Japan, or that Korea is illegally occupying the islets. Seoul's foreign ministry on Tuesday summoned an official from the Japanese embassy in Korea and strongly protested Tokyo's claim to Dokdo, saying the islets are clearly Korea's inherent territory historically, geographically, and under international law. It also expressed strong regret that forced labor is being described in a way that dilutes the nature of the coercion. The ministry urged Japan to behave more responsibly in educating future generations. As it says, having the correct historical awareness lays the foundation for establishing a future-oriented relationship. The changes in the textbooks come as the countries were off to a fresh start following South Korea's announcement of compensating Japan's wartime forced labor in the Seoul-Tokyo summit. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
The second Summit for Democracy began in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday, an annual meeting designed to hold rising authoritarian powers in check, including China. Topping the meeting on the first day was a call for peace in Ukraine. Our Moon Hae-ryun has the details.
This year's summit opened with a preliminary session hosted by Washington on Tuesday local time to highlight the key themes to be discussed over the next 3 days. It kicked off with the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken stressing the need for peace in Ukraine. While Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was originally scheduled to join the session, he was unable to attend as he extended his tour of the war's front lines. In his keynote speech, Blinken reiterated his support for a plan to establish peace in Ukraine through the full withdrawal of Russian troops, and expressed opposition to a proposal made by China following President Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow last week, saying it would only benefit Russia. Blinken also led a session on empowering women in democratic society to promote gender equality. An issue highlighted during his speech was the online harassment and abuse that women and girls face, which showcased the Global Partnership for Action on Gender-Based Online Harassment and Abuse initiative announced at the first summit 2 years ago. Other key topics on the agenda included countering corruption, led by U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and strengthening unions between democratic societies. The main conference will be co-hosted by the United States, South Korea, Costa Rica, the Netherlands, and Zambia the following day, with each co-host leading a virtual live session on a variety of topics. During Biden's first Summit for Democracy in 2021, around 110 countries were in attendance. This year, around 120 countries will be taking part, including Taiwan, despite China's efforts to exclude Taiwan from such multinational events. 문혜련, Arirang News.
And President Yoon will begin his Summit for Democracy co-hosting duties on Wednesday. The South Korean president is set to issue joint opening remarks with the leaders of the U.S., Costa Rica, Zambia, and the Netherlands. Yoon will then host the first leader-level plenary session on democracy delivering economic growth and shared prosperity. The session will involve activists and figures from civil society. On Thursday, Seoul will hold a hybrid regional meeting representing the Indo-Pacific with a focus on tackling corruption. The Summit for Democracy was launched in 2021 by U.S. President Joe Biden to address the growing challenges to civil and political rights and human rights across the world. In response to North Korea's testing of what it claims to be tactical ballistic missiles loaded with simulated nuclear warheads, the U.S. says Washington will continue to build its defense capabilities against the regime's evolving nuclear threats. Our Lee Seung-ja has more.
Speaking at a virtual press briefing on Tuesday, U.S. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby says the U.S. will continue to build its defense capabilities against North Korea's evolving nuclear threats, adding that the regime has been ignoring Washington's calls for dialogue. According to Kirby, the U.S. has not changed its desire to sit down with the regime in Pyongyang without precondition to find a diplomatic way forward to the denuclearization, verifiable denuclearization of the peninsula. However, he added that Washington is aware that North Korea is trying to improve the capabilities of its ballistic missiles and will continue to pursue its nuclear ambitions. So in response, he says the U.S. will continue to make sure that it has the appropriate military capabilities and the appropriate readiness to use such capabilities to protect its national security interests and those of its allies, including South Korea. His comments come as North Korea has been testing tactical ballistic missiles capable of mounting simulated nuclear warheads. At the same time, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has reportedly been guiding the regime's nuclear program, calling for the expanded production of weapons-grade nuclear materials to further increase its nuclear arsenal. According to the North state-run Korean Central News Agency, Kim also called for flawless preparation for the use of nuclear weapons anytime and anywhere. Meanwhile, during a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing on a defense budget request on Tuesday, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said Washington and Seoul are working to strengthen their joint defense capabilities against North Korea's evolving threats. He also reaffirmed the U.S.'s commitment to providing extended deterrence for South Korea and Japan, stressing that the three countries are able to demonstrate their ability to respond to any North Korean provocation. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Japan is set to release more than 1 million tons of water into the sea from the destroyed Fukushima nuclear power plant this spring. Now, the International Atomic Energy Agency claims the plan is safe, but what are the risks for consumers? For more, we're joined by Professor James Smith from the University of Portsmouth. Welcome to the program.
Hello.
Good morning. First off, what are the potential risks of eating seafood from regions affected by Fukushima radiation? I mean, in terms of health and diet.
Well, we know that after the original accident in Fukushima in 2011, there was a big release of radioactivity to the marine ecosystem, and this led to levels of radiocesium in fish that were in some places above the Japanese regulatory limit. But of course, these seafood in Japan is checked before it's sold and not caught from those areas which produce high levels of radiocesium in fish. And so the 100 becquerel per kilogram limit in Japan is suitable and won't lead to big radiation doses to consumers.
Right, then that leads to our second question. I mean, what advice can you give to people who enjoy seafood and maybe get their produce from a contaminated area? I mean, what do we have to do as consumers?
Well, I have no problem with people eating food from the Fukushima area of Japan. So, for example, the 100 becquerel per kilogram level in Japan is a very cautious one. So it's about 10 times lower than the level allowed in the EU for imports of food. In the UK, recently, it's been changed so that Japanese food from Fukushima can be imported without further checks. So I don't think consumers need to worry.
Okay, then why does such environmental pollution like from Fukushima matter to those who don't eat seafood? I mean, why do we have to care?
I don't think it is. Of course, there are problems in the Fukushima area about relocating people to the areas that were affected by terrestrial contamination, which is less easy to control and avoid. But I think that this release of wastewater that is planned to happen in the summer is a very, very millions of times lower level than the original release in 2011, and it's something that happens in nuclear plants all over the world, including in Korea, and so I don't see that as a problem.
Then what efforts are being made now to deal with and manage man-made environmental pollution like the contaminated water from Fukushima? What are some of the efforts being done globally?
Well, I think that in nuclear sites all the world round, there's control over what's released. So it's not like it was 40, 50 years ago where there were much less strict controls on what's released to the marine environment. So the water before it's released from Fukushima will be treated, and that'll reduce the radioactivity to very, very low levels. And then they're levels that are much lower than I would expect to have any effect either on the ecosystem or on people's health. For example, we've studied fish at Chernobyl, so in lakes around the Chernobyl, including the cooling pond at Chernobyl, and even and they're at very much higher levels of radioactivity than we see around Fukushima. And we haven't really seen very significant impacts on the fish. Although, of course, in Chernobyl, there are still some lakes where you can't eat the fish.
Right. All right. Professor, thank you so much for your insight this morning and evening for you.
Thank you.
More eased rules related to coronavirus are on the way here in South Korea, with the quarantine mandate expected to be reduced from a week to 5 days. The Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters will announce the COVID-19 crisis level adjustment roadmap, which includes the criteria and time frame for adjusting the crisis level and relaxing quarantine measures. It's also expected that the government will align its crisis level with the World Health Organization, which is expected to lift its global emergency status in late April or early May. The mask mandate, however, is likely to remain at hospitals and other high-risk facilities. The South Korean president has directly addressed the country's long-standing demographic sticking point, the lowest birth rate in the country, now which threatens the country's future productivity. Our Oh Soo-young reports.
Overcoming South Korea's demographic challenges requires social trust through long-term, not short-term policies, according to President Yoon. The South Korean leader on Tuesday opened the first meeting under his administration of the Presidential Committee on Aging Society and Population Policy. It was the first time in 7 years that the nation's leader personally presided over the committee meeting. This underscored the severe demographic challenges that past government plans and an accumulated budget of $215 billion have failed to resolve over the past 15 years. pointing out that the low birth rate problem is rooted in social issues such as public benefits, education, jobs, housing and taxation, as well as employment conditions for women. Yoon suggested that past efforts to promote child-rearing largely failed due to short-sighted measures and policy blind spots. He showed concern that many workers at small and medium-sized businesses and workers who don't have permanent contracts find it difficult to enjoy existing parental leave and childcare policies.
우리 사회가 보다 더 행복을 키워주는 문화, 또 열심히 하면 잘 살 수 있는 문화로 많이 바뀌어야 됩니다. 지나치게 과도하고 불필요한 경쟁에 휘말리는 그런 문화가 고쳐지지 않는 한 저출산 문제도 근본적인 답을 내놓기는 쉽지 않다고 봅니다.
According to Statistics Korea, South Korea's fertility rate fell to a record low of 0.78 child born per woman as of 2022. The figure also marks the lowest birth rate among 38 OECD countries. The country's percentage of people aged 65 and older is expected to hit 20.6 in 2025, transitioning into a super-aged society, which casts uncertainty over the country's productivity and workforce in the decades to come. The Population Committee plans to pursue 5 focus areas to help raise the flailing birth rate, which include expanding quality childcare services and policies to help working parents look after their children. It will also focus on housing and financial support, welfare and tax benefits, along with healthcare services. Calling for a full review of current policies aimed at promoting a higher birth rate, President Yoon says stronger measures and intensive investment are needed to build up trust in state support for childcare, and to ensure that the joy of raising children and self-actualization can both be fulfilled. 오수영, Arirang News.
For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley joining us here in the studio. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning, Dami.
Let's start in Mexico and reports of a number of deaths caused by a fire at a migrant detention center.
Well, that's right. At least 40 people have been killed and over 24 injured in a fire at the National Migration Institute in Ciudad Juarez City, located near the United States border. Now, among the victims were migrants who had come from Central and South America, hoping to enter the U.S. According to authorities, the fire broke out around 9:30 p.m. on Monday local time. They suspect that migrants who had been caught earlier on Monday set mattresses ablaze in the facility after hearing that they would be deported. Now, the fire comes as the U.S.-Mexico border has seen an influx of migrants, as Title 42, a restrictive pandemic-era border policy that gives the U.S. government power to eject migrants at its border, is set to expire. Turning over to the European Union now, as the 27-nation bloc has finalized a plan that effectively bans the sale of new fossil fuel cars by the year 2035. Now, the deal was made official in Brussels on Tuesday local time, after a meeting between EU energy and transport ministers. It calls for a 100% reduction in CO2 emissions by the cut-off date for car manufacturers, which effectively prohibits the sale of new combustion vehicles. However, one exemption was made, as Germany successfully campaigned to allow the sale of vehicles that only use e-fuels, which is a technology combining hydrogen and carbon dioxide to make synthetic fuels. The new regulation marks an acceleration of efforts to switch to electric vehicles and tackle climate change. Data show that the cars make up 12% of the EU's total carbon emissions. Meanwhile, in the Twitter space, CEO Elon Musk has announced a new set of changes. According to a tweet by the billionaire on Monday, only those with paid Twitter Blue accounts will have their tweets featured on the recommended For You page. The changes also restricts voting on Twitter polls to users with a blue check verified account. Now, Musk says the measures are the only realistic way to clamp down on AI bots that have flooded the platform. The bots have been an issue for years for Twitter, spreading fake news and spam accounts. The changes will be implemented on April 15th, with membership costing $7 per month when paying a one-year membership up front, or $8 on a month-to-month basis. And finally, a giant meatball made using extinct woolly mammoth DNA has been unveiled. Created by Australian cultured meat company Vow, the meatball was displayed at the Nemo Science Museum in the Netherlands on Tuesday local time. The meatball was created by inserting a mammoth gene mixed with African elephant DNA into sheep stem cells, which were replicated to grow. Now, the company said that the mammoth meatball was made to get people talking about cultured meat, seen as a sustainable alternative to real meat, and to raise awareness of climate change, as it's believed to have played a role in the mammoth's extinction alongside hunting by humans.
Good morning. We still need a thick jacket or sweater when we step out the door in the mornings, but after a chilly start, temperatures will warm into the 20s by the afternoon under sunny skies today. So daily highs will be 2 to 7 degrees Celsius higher than season norms in most parts of the country. It will feel more like the end of April this afternoon. So it's another day with big temperature swings between day and night. So as you might have guessed, much of Korea will be covered with unsafe levels of ultra-fine dust today. And unfortunately, it looks to be even a dustier day tomorrow. Morning temperatures are 2 to 4 degrees higher than the same time yesterday. Highs will rise fast along with the sunshine. Daejeon topping out at 22 degrees. Daegu, Gyeongju topping out at 21 degrees. Gwangju will see a high of 23. Now, after a big warm-up in the afternoon, we are cooling down fast overnight, so do dress accordingly to avoid catching a cold, while temperatures continue to nicely warm up as we head towards the weekend, topping out at 24 degrees Celsius here in the capital. That's Korea for you. Here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. Do stay with us for more updates throughout the day. Thanks for watching.